This is Jeff Davis with the Alignment Podcast, where we explore sales and marketing alignment strategy for B2B businesses. Make sure to visit jeffdavis2.com for all things alignment. Now let's talk about how to create togetherness. In this episode, I speak with Mike Schultz, founder and president of Rain Group, a global sales training and performance improvement company. In our conversation, we cover the fact that their studies have shown that buyers actually want to hear from sellers much earlier in the sales process than you think. The paradox of choice is actually leading many B2B buying teams to no decision rather than choosing the competitor, and that we must be able to answer two crucial questions to effectively close business with B2B buyers today. Why act and why now? With that said, let's jump into the episode. Mike, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Oh, thanks, Jeff, for having me.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you a little bit, actually about a lot of things, but I do want to really focus today on you being a consulting and having a consulting company, which we'll get into a little bit, just helping us think through when does the company know they need help? What are those things they can start to look at to say, like, it's time to pivot and we need to bring in somebody like yourself, the Rain Group, or somebody else. So, but before we dive into that, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. Well, let's see. It all started when I was 5, and I read In Search of Excellence. And that started a lifelong, So I'm the founder and president of Rain Group. We are in our 15th year. Our focus in the world is to unleash sales potential. And we do that through both consulting analysis through our Rain Group Center for Sales Research, and as well through sales training and performance improvement initiatives. We're based in Boston, and we also have offices in Geneva, London, Mumbai, Sydney, Johannesburg, Toronto, and Bogota. And my personal role at the company is leading the company and leading our domestic and global growth, but as well our own product development and our research arm, which I know that we're going to be talking about quite a bit today.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. So let's start with this one. I've gotten this question a lot of times from people is, you have a company, a B2B company, they are struggling with sales, but they don't know where the sales process is broken, and they don't know what is really the root cause of that sales process being broken. Give us some tips and some ideas around how do you break down that sales process to understand where the problems exist?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, I think let's start off with a view that is above the sales process itself, because sales process are those stages, those gated stages from planning to prospecting to needs discovery to driving ideas all the way through to negotiating, winning business, and managing accounts. That is the sales process. Which for those of you who are interested, if you Google Rain Group 6 stages of buying process, you'll find an outlined buy-sell process on the web pretty easily. But it goes beyond that. So I'll give you an example. Through the Rain Group Center for Sales Research, just a couple of years ago, we studied 472 mid-sized and large sales organizations, with the average amount of sellers being a few hundred, but I think 26% of the database was companies that were over $1 billion in revenue, to figure out what those companies that had better performance, higher win rates, increases in revenue, that they hit their sales goals, that those sales goals were challenging, that they were able to hit their challenging sales goals while maintaining a level of premium pricing. It sounds to me like I would like to hit my goals that are challenging goals and maintain premium pricing and have high win rates. So that was our top performer criteria. And it turns out that they do lots of things, sales process and beyond, quite differently. So how we tend to, as you said, figure out how the sales process is broken, I'll get to that in a second. But at first, if you just ask the question, can we and should we be performing better across our sales organization? You want to look at the sales process, but you also want to look at other areas. The areas that we look at tend to be 8 across what we call the sales performance wheel. It's strategy. Are we actually going after the market the right way? Do we have the right messaging? Do we have the right value proposition compared to our competitors? Like, can and should we win? I know some places where the sales process is great and the products and services really suck. And no matter how good your sales process is, if stuff sucks, you're not going to sell that much of it. So there's strategy. I know some sales processes that are great and the products are priced too high or too low, and that makes you underperform. Pricing is part of strategy. Strategy, structure. Do we have the right amount of sellers? Do we have the right people generating leads? Should we have channels? Where are they located? What do they get paid? Operations. How do we know what's actually happening here? Are we smooth or are we taking forever to do things? And enablement. What are we doing to help our sellers to perform better? You know, is there a turbo factor we can add to their performance? And this is actually where we tend to look at sales process, because it's about helping sellers know what stages they need to go through. So strategy, structure, operations, and enablement. The other four, which I won't go through in detail, have less to do with the organization and more to do with the people, which is, do we have the right people and are we managing the talent properly? Do we have the right capabilities across these people and can we train them to get them better? And do we have a culture and set of people that are motivated to be top performers? So we look across those things. So you might have a really good sales process, but if you have a company culture where people don't like working there, doesn't matter how good your sales process is, you could end up with unmotivated people who are not driving success. What I'd like to add on sales process is that, of course, process itself, when you get down to, do we actually know for our sellers what they're supposed to be doing first and next, and how to flow buyers through the various stages of their buying process so that you have the greatest velocity through the sales process, the greatest success, the largest potential engagements, that you're differentiating as you go, that you win, all those kinds of things. And in our analysis of these sales organizations, we defined, we put everyone into 5 categories, whether they were world-class at something, whether something was just well-managed. Well, perhaps it wasn't exactly well-managed, but it was at least defined. The category before that is emerging, where they haven't defined it, but there's some key points, or whether it's ad hoc. And we looked at the sales process, whether it was world-class, managed, defined, emerging, and ad hoc. The top performers, 18% of them were world-class, and only of the rest, only 7% were. That's a huge, like more than twice as many. For the top performers, 16% were managed, and only 7% were managed for the rest. Again, twice as much. And then defined, the top performers, 35% was at least defined, and only 29% was defined for the rest. Then when you get to emerging and ad hoc, the rest, or the underperformers, were much less likely to have a sales process defined. They were, I think, 46% said it was emerging versus the top performers, only 23% was emerging. So it was this big flip that the sales process itself was, at the top performers, at least defined, but more often it was a well-managed and vibrant process that actually helped sellers provide the most value for buyers. That was a big part of what we studied in the sales process. Was the sales process built to close deals, or was the sales process built to maximize client value and, of course, end up with more closed deals? But it was much better at the organizations that focused on sales process and making sure that it was as good and as strong as possible at their organization.
Nice. Now, before moving on, I want to make sure that people are able to actually capture the 8 points from the sales performance wheel. So can you go through those 8 once again, because I think they're really, really important.
Yeah. So first, the points are strategy, structure, process, and enablement. Those are organizational factors. And then people factors are talent management, training capabilities, and motivation. But if you go to our website, raingroup.com, and you go to the white papers area, you'll find a white paper that outlines all of these, called the 8 drivers of sales performance. And inside of that, it'll outline those areas plus the subcategories in each that you need to look at if you're trying to figure out how should we improve our overall sales performance.
Okay, great. Extremely helpful. And speaking of sales performance, so I've had several conversations
about a lot of B2B sales organizations not quite understanding how the sales process has changed. And I want to get your thoughts on this one. So the argument is that no sales process nowadays really goes in this linear fashion of starting at the top of the funnel, people then convert to the different stages, and at the end of the funnel, it turns out to be a conversion or a closed deal. Where we really are starting to see people is it's more of a fluid interaction where people, you're finding them, you're engaging with them in some way, you close business, and then many organizations are following this prescription model where they have to continue to grow the business, whether that be through additional services or expansion of the services that they're using. What are your thoughts about the sales process in general and just kind of using this kind of historical model of pushing people through stages?
I think that the connotation of pushing people through stages isn't the right thing, but I think the stages still exist. I think what has happened is that the things that buyers expect in every stage for the seller to satisfy them at that stage, and when the buyers want to engage with sellers in those stages are different things. So let's think about the buying process. At first, I think that there are really three stages of the buying process with some sub-labels. At first, they're defining a vision. Someone's walking around inside of an organization saying, we should. At first, it's we should drive performance in this area. And then they try to figure out, well, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we're trying to solve a problem or we're trying to get a better future. Maybe something's not broken, or maybe it is. Maybe it's not broken, we're growing at 20%, we should be growing at 40%. So they're either problem solving or future seeking. And then they start an analysis process to say, what can we do about this? So that's define vision. Then there's execute purchase. They decide on some kind of intervention. One of them might be, let's improve our marketing. Well, the intervention could be PR, the intervention could be website, the intervention could be search, the intervention could be brand and messaging. The intervention could be anything to improve our marketing. But what are we going to choose, and how are we going to evaluate those options? Then they make a selection to say, all right, we're going to do this thing with this company, with this partner, and then they have to commit. They negotiate an agreement, make a commitment, they execute it, and they start allocating funds. That's the execute purchase. So there's define vision, execute purchase, and then after that, and I still think it's a part of the buying process, it's driving results. I just bought this, now I need to make it work. And that's an ongoing process of working with a vendor to actually drive that forward. So what's changed? We all have heard that 57% of the purchase decision is complete before our customer calls us a supplier.
I have never heard that.
No, nobody's ever heard that. And then Serious Decisions has a statistic that says that 67% of the buying journey is now done digitally. And so I think that what the connotation of these things are, without further explanation, is that many sellers assume that buyers don't want or need to talk to sellers in the early part of the process. Also, in the last, call it 10 years, there's been this massive push to inbound versus outbound, which is driven largely by the company HubSpot, which has done an amazing job of marketing the concept of inbound. Is that, okay, well, the buying journey is done early and we should really just be focusing on inbound, says this, big voice in the world of selling. And I don't like making calls anyway, so this is a good excuse not to prospect. So we just studied 488 buyers who are sold to all the time and make decisions, and 489 sellers who prospect all the time. We asked the buyers across that exact sales process, the define vision, execute purchase, and drive results, when do you want to engage with sellers? Well, it turns out that the time that they want to engage with them the most is, quote, when I'm looking for new ideas and possibilities to drive stronger results to improve my business. 71% of buyers said they want to talk to sellers at that time. 62% of sellers said when I'm actively looking for a solution to fix what's broken or solve a problem. So not just when they're looking for ideas of what to do, but when they're looking for ideas to actually, fix something that they've identified with. And so then it actually goes down as you go further into the process. So for example, when I'm analyzing a situation and its causes is 49%, and it's similar amount when I'm identifying and evaluating possible providers. And then, and this is the time when we all hate to hear from a buyer, is after a provider has responded to my request for proposal. That's when I want to interact with them, such as a finalist presentation. That was only 30%. So 57% is buying process is done, and 67% of the buying journey is done digitally. Well, so what? Buyers want to hear from you early in the process, and I think it has to do with all this. Oh, buyers can do their own research on the web. I can find tons of suppliers on the web to do virtually anything for me. Do you know how hard it is to sort that out? There's a psychological principle called the paradox of choice. There's a book called The Paradox of Choice. Is that the more choices that you have, the more indecision arises, and the more paralysis by analysis arises from the person that, at least in these cases, is making a purchase. So you need to talk to someone to help you sort it out. And in fact, that's what buyers want. So all of this information available to buyers, we don't even need to hear about our capabilities anymore, because that's what we would do 20 years ago. They needed to hear from our capabilities from us because we held the brochures and there was no internet. Well, as a matter of fact, buyers actually want to hear about your capabilities too, because they have trouble sorting that out as well. So I think to your question, the buying process and the selling process is still relevant. I just think that if you taking more critical thought about what buyers really want and need in the buying process, then you can do some really good things in the selling process to move them through those gated stages. I'm going to add one more thing that I think is a problem with many sales processes that I see. It usually goes something like, prospect to create a lead, or for lead, and then the next thing is to discover needs, and then you craft a solution. I think that there's a huge untapped opportunity to think about that differently. Don't just think about prospecting and then discover needs. Think about prospecting and then driving needs. Is that if you can inspire buyers with ideas, for example, if you're calling up with a new technology or a new consulting process, or a way that you've done something with your products that has changed your buyer's success, and you call them and say, geez, we have this new process and it's gotten XYZ results. Let's talk about it. And the buyer says, yeah, sure. And you get on the phone and you start doing a needs discovery, what keeps you up at night? That actually is frustrating to the buyers. Like, I can tell you what's keeping me up at night, but you said you had this process that is creating results.
Right, so tell me about it.
Are you going to share it with me or not? If I find it to be relevant, we can have a back and forth. So don't think about it just as needs discovery. Think about it as needs driving. Think about it as inspiring buyers with ideas. And if you can do that and think about the sales process a little bit differently than how they tend to be outlined, you're going to have more success.
And adding on to that, two of the themes that I continue to hear is, just what you said, is really thinking through how do you inspire the buyer to change the way they think versus just your product? What are you going to share with them to proactively say, these are the things you should be thinking about, because if you don't change X, Y, Z, whatever that is, versus just coming in with products and features. But I'd also add to that, what I continue to hear too is salespeople assuming that the prospect is ready to make a decision. So a lot of times they make the alternative, or your competition is no decision. So it's making sure you're proactively thinking through, making sure that they're ready to make a decision and just inspiring them to do that. So I'm glad you added that piece.
Yeah, when you think about a buyer and the decisions that they make, the first thing that a seller needs to satisfy is the answer to the question, why act and why now? So you might be talking with a buyer about something that can get them really good performance, but if they don't believe the why act and why now story, you might lose to no decision. Well, I'm just going to do something else because that case wasn't as strong. We were working with a seller once, and we were doing a post-mortem on a sale, and we talked to the buyer, and the seller was beside themselves. It was like, wow, they could spend $500,000 on us, and it was easy to see how they were absolutely positively going to save $10 million if they did it. And then we talked to the buyer and we said, it looked like the ROI case, which we think was pretty solid, was spend $500,000 and by the end of the year save $10 million. He said, oh yeah, I believe that. The challenge is I'm solving $50 million problems right now. So it was actually a good ROI case, but it lost out to the other things that the buyer could have pursued. In fact, when we looked at the win rates because we looked at the win rate on proposed business, across all of the various people in our database, the win rate was 47%. Lose to competitor was 28%, but lose to no decision was 25%. And the win rate of top performers wasn't 47%. The win rate of top performers was 62%. So they were losing a lot less to competitors, but they were also losing a lot less to no decision.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes people don't give enough attention to the no decision option. They're just thinking of losing to competitors.
For sure.
Yeah. And so speaking of metrics and benchmarks, I think what a lot of leaders struggle with is knowing what good looks like. What resources or how does a B2B leader think about comparing themselves to their colleague? Where can they find benchmarks? Because sometimes people don't know that what they're doing is bad or subpar, and so they just said, this is how it's always been. As long as it's stable or it's growing a bit, then we're okay. They don't realize how much opportunity there is to do better. How do they do that differently?
Right, for sure. I mean, the way that we do it for our clients is to actually benchmark them against the best practices database to see where you are compared to the top performers, the elite performers, and the rest. We've put clients through this and found like some pretty astounding things. And I'll give you an example. One of the factors that affects sales performance greatly is whether or not sellers know what they're supposed to do and what their expectations are every day on the job. So we asked the question once of the sellers and of the leadership, do you think the sellers know what they're supposed to do every day on the job to produce the best results? And they all answered yes, just like top and elite performers. So then, that was great. But you might think, okay, then it's probably something else that's going to drive performance. So we asked them when we followed up to say, we asked the leaders, well, what are those expectations? And the leaders all agreed with each other what they expected from sellers. And then we asked some of the sellers, well, what do you think the expectations are? And the sellers agreed and gave us similar answers of what was expected of them. However, when we compared what was expected of the sellers from the seller's point of view and what was expected of the sellers from the leader's point of view, it was wildly different. So it turns out that one question, we literally had an intervention. Intervention sounds like a big psychological thing. We had a facilitated process where we worked through expectations. And the seller said, I can't believe that I was doing this for the last year because you wanted me to be doing that. And I missed it. So that was a huge change in them. Like, why are we not capturing this untapped growth opportunity in our market with the three-pronged strategy that we have? Yeah, because nobody was working on it. Nobody was talking to buyers about it. So if you go through this process, and I know, Jeff, you're an expert in marketing and sales alignment. How about sales and sales alignment? If you literally just know what you're supposed to do.
Thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. If you literally just know what you're supposed to do, it can help. So we tend to look across 75 factors in those eight areas, and we do it from a benchmark perspective to see how you compare against others. But we also do it from an analysis perspective to find those areas that are the greatest areas of leverage. I'll give you one other common area of leverage, and you can let me know what your experiences are with this. If you said to 100 leaders, do you guys focus on driving maximum value for your buyers? 100 out of 100 are likely to say yes to your face, right? Because who's going to say no? Nah, I don't care about them. I just want to sell stuff. Okay. Well, if you ask them in a confidential research report where you're never going to report everything, or you're never going to report them by name, and you ask leaders and sellers, do you believe the primary focus of the sales organization is to drive maximum value for buyers? Well, a lot of them don't answer yes. And it comes down to this. Some organizations are truly focused on, let's be better for our customers. Let's be better for our customers. Let's bring them ideas that if they buy it, they're going to be thrilled with us in 6 months because it's going to make a difference and they're not going to overbuy. And at the end of the quarter, when faced with trying to hit a number or not, it's more of a focus to make sure that the buyers buy the right things in the right way versus closing the deal before the 31st so I can hit my number and trying to just shove something in there. So we looked at whether or not a culture was value driving, and those cultures that were value driving, that put buyer interests first over just hitting some numbers and my own parochial self-interest, they had way better motivation. They had way better sales managers that were focusing on coaching their sellers, and they got a ton more out of their sellers. The sellers were much more highly likely to pursue top performance. It was like 85% of sellers at what we called value driving organizations pursued top performance versus only 50% at the other ones. And this is an engagement thing. You've probably heard in the past a seller say, if I believe in what I'm selling, I can sell a ton of it. Well, if the culture drives sellers to believe that they're doing the right thing by other people, they absolutely love selling there. They're much more highly likely to stay versus go. The retention numbers of top performing sellers at these organizations is much higher. And they're much more energetically focused on bringing out all of the capabilities of the organization to their clients because they believe they're doing, good in the world and good by other people, versus the ones that show up at some software company and they say, you better hit your numbers or you're out of here.
Yeah.
The results are just so much better in the other cultures. So we find out, what do people believe? And interestingly, we have found that in the same organization, people sometimes believe that they are a value-driving organization and sometimes they don't. And we can literally analyze sales manager by sales manager which groups are not doing this. And we have found that sometimes, let's say there's 10 sales managers overseeing 10 salespeople each and there's 100 sellers, that 60 of the sellers believe they're value-driving sales organization. They all align to these 6 sales managers. And the other sales managers are more numbers focused, and they're not coaching them and they're not helping them think about value. And the other 4 groups are, the other 40 roll up to the 4 sales managers that don't focus on value. And the turnover in those groups are higher and the results in those groups are lower. So the ones that are actually focusing on numbers, and focusing on pushing performance over all else actually have worse results than those that focus on driving buyer value. The sellers actually sell more.
Which is really
interesting stuff. So we analyze around the 8 drivers of sales performance, and that's how we find things.
I like it. So in the little time we have left, I want to give you a little window to talk about. I know you have some new research that just came out. I believe it's called the 5 Prospecting Myths Debunked. Tell us some high-level stuff so that people can find the research and learn more about it.
Sure, we'll do the rapid section of the sports show with a couple of key points. So we literally just released this yesterday. 488 buyers responsible for $4.2 billion in purchases across 25 industries and 489 sellers across 26 industries, all about prospecting. So here's some things that we found. There's that thing that we talked about before, the myth, buyers don't want to hear from sellers. Wrong. They want to hear from sellers, and they want to hear from sellers early in the process. 2, one of the most common myths in selling is that cold calling is dead. And that is because article after article, oh boy, how many months have to go by before I see 6 articles at a time that cold calling is dead. Turns out buyers really want to hear from you by phone, and the more senior the buyer, the more they expect you to call them. So email was the preferred buyer communication method. That was first, but phone was second. From the seller's point of view, 3 out of the top 5 ways that they end up getting meetings is through the phone, calling people that they know at existing accounts, calling people that they don't know at existing accounts, and then calling people that they don't know at potential new accounts. Number 3, it's impossible to get through now. There's the voicemail, When I was selling 20 years ago, it was so easy, and now you can't get through. Yeah, well, you know what? 82% of buyers say they accept meetings with sellers who reach out to them. It's just, you have to run what we call an attraction campaign. You can't spam. Buyers keep saying, oh, yeah, I cannot stand it if they just send me an email and it's obviously just mail merge. Why don't you look me up and look my company up and say something to me about me that I might find valuable? That's so rare, I pay attention to the sellers. So they say it's impossible to get through. Well, it's not. It's just the sellers they either don't know how to do it, they don't have the resources, or they're too lazy. But those that aren't, they get through all the time. Number 4, buyers don't want to hear about your capabilities. Oh, they can look it up on the web. They don't want to hear about your capabilities. We looked at 11 factors about content that influence buyers to accept a meeting or otherwise connect with the seller. The number 1 factor was primary research data relevant to our business. Reach out about primary research data. They want to hear about it. The second is descriptions of the provider's capabilities at 67%, and tied with that was what I just mentioned, content 100% customized to our specific situation. They wrote to or did research on me, and they want to talk to me about it. That was very important and highly influential to buyers as to whether or not they accept meetings. For C-level buyers and VP level buyers, pay more attention to your return on investment cases. They like to see investment return. Number 5 is that cold meetings don't convert to sales. Well, actually, if the sellers, and we looked at this whole sort of value-driven issue, is that we asked the buyers, are these factors influential as to whether or not they affect your ultimate purchase decision? Focuses on the value they could deliver me, 96% of buyers said that. Collaborates with me, 93% of buyers said that. Educates me with new ideas and perspectives, 92% said that was influential to them. So if you can focus on the value in the process, even if it's a cold, started process versus, say, them calling you, you can influence whether or not they buy from you if you do those kinds of things. So value is super important, not just in general, but if you have that as a part of your systematic approach to selling from cold prospecting perspective, that's going to help you close more deals. And you can find this research as well. We just posted it on raingroup.com. So if you go to raingroup.com, look in the research section, you will find it.
And I will also include that in the show notes. So I actually think the comment on value is the perfect way to end our conversation. Mike, this has been really, really, really great. I think that all the research you're doing and the insights you're providing people is extremely useful. So thank you for your time today, and thanks for connecting.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Don't forget to visit me at jeffdavis2, the number 2.com, and follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Davis2. Did today's conversation resonate with you? Then share with your colleagues to help the Alignment Podcast grow. Join us for the next episode where we continue to talk about how to create togetherness.